The episode opens with the familiar reminder that police work rarely follows a script, then drops the viewer straight into Toledo, Ohio, a Midwestern city with nicknames like the Glass City and Holy Toledo. Because of its skyline crowded with church steeples, officers on patrol are dispatched to what the radio blandly calls a domestic disturbance. But the details that follow make it clear this is more than a loud argument. A woman has locked herself inside a van outside her home. Her live-in boyfriend is outside with several knives threatening her, and according to what he told the 911 call taker, promising that things will get ugly when police arrive. Multiple units respond knowing that domestic calls are among the most volatile situations they face, especially when weapons are involved. As they approach, officers see the man moving around the property and then suddenly bolting away into an alley, a classic sign that the situation is not under control. A food chase unfolds in the darkness between houses, dogs barking, officers shouting commands, the suspect attempting to disappear into backyards and shadows, but ultimately tackled and handcuffed by officers who have seen this pattern many times before. Once he is in custody, the picture splits into two sides, as it so often does in domestic cases. The suspect, breathing hard and trying to reassemble his pants and dignity, insists that he has done nothing. He tells officers that he, not his girlfriend, is the one who was assaulted. His face does look a bit roughed up, and he uses that to bolster his story, framing the knives as simply tools he had out for himself, not to threaten anyone, and portraying his decision to run as a meaningless panic rather than an admission of guilt. The officers push him. If he hadn't done anything, why flee? Why were there knives on the table within reach? He doesn't have good answers, just deflection and frustration at one point, half joking that the officers kill him with their questions more than any suspect does with violence. Inside and around the van, the woman gives a very different account. Shaken, injured, and still trying to shield her dog from what she describes as her boyfriend's rage. She explains that the trouble began earlier at a bar where she works as a barmaid. She had been at her sister-in-law's place, socializing with her nephew and others. Her boyfriend apparently felt ignored, and that perceived slight was enough to trigger a violent outburst. She describes being beaten at the bar, then coming home only to be attacked again in her own house. He punched her, threatened to kill her, and even kicked her dog hard enough that she felt she had to lock the animal away to keep it safe. At some point, she retreated into the van parked outside, took her phone and dialed 911. To keep him from realizing she was calling the police, she pretended she was speaking to her daughter, even as the dispatcher warned her not to hang up. She did hang up for safety reasons, then resumed dealing with the immediate threat in front of her. A man, she says, has assaulted her before living in her home for 4 years now outside the van with knives, telling her she was going to die, or he was. She shows the officers the marks on her body, points to a lump on her head, complains of a possibly broken hand from fighting back, and repeats that she has endured this pattern in the past. In these parallel interviews, the dynamics of domestic abuse come into focus. He insists he never hit her, that he loves her, that he was simply angry and misunderstood, that the knives were harmless, that he had no intention of hurting anyone. He alternates between denial and resignation, at one moment refusing to admit any wrongdoing, and at the next telling officers to just charge him with whatever they are going to charge him with. She, by contrast, tries to be both honest and protective, at the same time admitting she fought back, acknowledging her own injuries, expressing fear mixed with a kind of exhausted familiarity. In the end, the officers make the call that the situation warrants. Given the report to 911, the presence of weapons, the injuries they can see, and the suspect's attempt to flee, he is arrested for domestic violence and obstruction. As he is loaded into the patrol car, still complaining that he never threatened anyone, the viewer is reminded of how often these scenes repeat in households across America, behind closed doors, that only open when someone finally calls for help. The tone then shifts sharply as the show cuts to a very different call in a different part of the country. On a busy roadway lined with trees and houses, officers aren't responding to a human suspect at all, but to a full-sized zebra running loose in traffic. The dispatch describes it simply as a hazard, but in reality, it is an unpredictable, powerful animal, weaving through cars and posing a danger both to itself and to everyone nearby. Patrol cars execute a rolling traffic brake, slowing and diverting traffic, trying to create a moving perimeter around the zebra so that no cars will hit it and no pedestrians will get too close. The animal has reportedly been spooked by dogs and is described by its trainers as feral in behavior, prone to bolting and possibly capable of harming people or smashing through fences. An animal trainer in a separate vehicle attempts to lasso the zebra while officers maneuver their patrol cars like chess pieces, blocking off bushes and access points where the animal could disappear. The first attempts fail. The zebra is too fast and too strong, and even when the lasso briefly catches around its head, the trainer can't hold it. The animal darts into a backyard, then another bouncing along fences, threatening to leap over parked cars and wooden barriers. Officers follow on foot, trying both to contain it and to avoid provoking it into a dangerous charge. The situation becomes almost surreal when the zebra cornered near a suburban swimming pool plunges into the water. For a moment, everyone freezes watching this black and white striped animal swimming laps in a residential pool, under a hot sun, snorting and splashing. The trainer and officers now use the pool and a strategically placed horse trailer to their advantage, letting the zebra tire itself out while making sure ropes are safely anchored so no one gets dragged across concrete. Gradually, they shift the rope, open gates, and coax the animal toward the trailer. There is a tense moment when it seems the zebra might crash through a fence or kick someone, but eventually it moves into the trailer where it can be transported back to safety. When it's over, no officers are hurt, no citizens are injured, and the zebra is alive and contained. It has cost resources and effort, but as one officer notes, that's part of the job. On any given day, you might go from a domestic knife threat to a runaway zebra within hours. The show uses this incident to highlight the unpredictability of policing, the way officers have to be ready not just for armed suspects, but also for frightened animals that don't understand sirens or commands yet can do massive damage if panicked. In the next vignette, the scene moves to Portland, Oregon, where a 9-year veteran officer, who previously served for 13 years in Detroit, talks about how he chose Portland as a better environment to raise his 2 daughters. His off-duty passion is playing rugby, a rough sport that he says helps him blow off steam from the stress of the job. The call drawing him away from that reflection is labeled as a disturbance. A man reportedly chasing another man and a woman with a rock threatening violence. As the patrol car heads toward the location, the officer spots a commotion, a man running something in his hand and another person fleeing. He and his partner jump out, shout commands, and order the man to drop whatever he's holding and sit on the curb. In interviews at the scene, the story again splits into 2 versions but with a clearer theme of revenge. The man holding the rock claims the other man beat up my brother recently, and that he was simply chasing him to confront him. Officer pressed him about why he needed a large rock and a stick if he wasn't planning to actually attack. He insists he only wanted to scare the man, but his narrative becomes less convincing as he struggles to explain. Meanwhile, the man who was being chased says he was simply walking when the other man, whom he barely knows from across the street, came at him aggressively, threw a soda can at him, and then pursued him around the neighborhood. He says he ran to a nearby business, begged the employees to let him hide, and watched as his pursuer stalked the lot, shouting threats like, "Where is he? I'm going to kill him!" The witnesses at the car lot confirm this account. One employee describes washing a car when a frightened young man ran in asking to hide from someone with a rock who was threatening to attack him. The employee saw the pursuer enter a moments later, rock still in hand, looking for the victim, and called the police. Further questioning reveals that several people in the neighborhood believe the victim did in fact fight with the pursuer's brother weeks earlier. But that old grievance does not justify chasing someone down the street with a weapon. When officers confront the rock-wielding man with the witnesses' statements, he attempts to deny everything or claim mistaken identity, arguing that 4 people could be confusing him with someone else. The officers don't buy it. Given the statements and the weapon involved, they arrest him for disorderly conduct and menacing, emphasizing that taking revenge into one's own hands, especially with a rock and threats, crosses the line into criminal behavior. S25 E1-2. The episode then pivots to another Portland area segment, this time focused on the quiet but notorious backlot of a business that officers know often attracts illicit activity. The same officer who spoke about his daughters decides to swing the patrol car behind a building where he says they frequently find trouble. Sure enough, he spots a parked car with fogged windows, subtle movement inside, and the kind of half-hidden location that promises something more than a simple nap. As the officers approach, the people inside scramble. The woman is partially undressed and sitting on top of the man in a way that leaves little doubt as to what they were doing. The officers order them to get dressed and keep their hands visible. In the process of getting the couple out of the car, they spot a glass pipe on the back seat, a type commonly used for smoking methamphetamine. The situation could easily escalate into a drug arrest, but details matter. The pipe appears clean without visible residue, making it tricky to prove possession of a usable amount of narcotics. The woman, identified as Portia, has a history with the law and appears defensive, swinging between sarcasm and apology, insisting she does not use meth and only drinks alcohol. She explains that they met in this secluded lot because her mother forbids interracial relationships. She is white, the man is Mexican, and she says her mother is extremely racist. Meeting in a hidden parking area is, she claims, a way to avoid trouble at home, though the officers clearly see that the location and circumstances also match the pattern of prostitution. They probe gently about whether she is being paid, whether her partner is a client rather than a boyfriend, but she sticks to the story that they are just friends, that there was no exchange of money, and that the pipe must have appeared by some unexplained means. The man, Santiago, is more cooperative and has a clean record. His car properly registered, his demeanor calm. He too disclaims knowledge of the pipe, though he concedes he understands what it is normally used for. Without residue or additional evidence of drugs, the officers are left in that familiar gray zone between suspicion and legally provable crime. They decide not to arrest either party for drug possession or public indecency, opting instead for a stern warning. They tell the couple plainly that having sex in public is illegal and that meeting in such a place with drug paraphernalia present is a bad idea that could have landed them in jail. The encounter ends with the officers sending them on their way, having hopefully scared them enough to think twice about parking in dark corners in the future. From there, the show moves into an extended look at modern prostitution enforcement. Officer explained that the landscape has shifted from streetwalkers flagging down cars on corners to sex workers advertising online and arranging meetings in hotel rooms via phone and text. The operation the viewer sees involves a hotel where undercover officers occupy rooms while surveillance teams monitor the parking lots and hallways. The first target is a woman who arrives by taxi dressed casually but with the confident demeanor of someone used to this work. She meets an undercover male officer posing as a client, negotiates a price, $200 for sexual services, and confirms the exchange clearly enough that the crime is complete once she accepts the money. At that point, the arrest team moves in, identifying themselves, securing her hands, and explaining that she is under arrest for loitering with the intent of prostitution. She's surprisingly composed, nodding and answering questions with little fuss, as if she expected that this line of work might eventually bring her into contact with the law. The next operation involves a different kind of case, a transgender or transvestite escort advertised online, who appears outwardly as a blonde woman in a red leather jacket, but is, as officers know, from prior investigation, biologically male. The undercover sting is framed as a couple's date, with both a male and female undercover officer posing as partners, seeking a sexual encounter together. Before the escort arrives, they review their cover story, making sure their details align. The suspect arrives at the hotel, steps out of a cab, and is welcomed warmly into the room. The conversation is awkward at first, as the escort tries to gauge whether the pair are real clients or potential police, even asking directly if they are cops. They deny it and continue talking, eventually arriving at an agreement, a set amount of money around $250 for sex with both of them. Once the price is confirmed and the exchange of money occurs or is clearly anticipated, the arrest team bursts in ordering the escort to pull down the shirt, raise hands, and submit to handcuffs. The escort, whose legal name is Gabriel, and who says he is originally from Mexico, but now lives in Oakland, appears stunned, but not entirely shocked, as if aware that his online ads walk a fine line. Officers explain that he is under arrest for solicitation of prostitution, then escort him away to be processed. The segment underscores the way internet-based sex work has changed the geography of enforcement. No more simple strolls on known vice corners, but rather coordinated hotel operations with undercover officers who must convincingly play the role of clients, partners, and even couples exploring their sexuality. S25 E1-2. The final vignette of the episode takes place on the eternally lit Las Vegas Strip at Flamingo, where neon signs and casino marquees compete for attention alongside something less glamorous: the steady stream of young women selling sex and older men buying it. Officers on patrol describe the area as one of the main fairways for working girls, a place where the boundary between tourist partying and exploitation is thin. They spot two young women dressed provocatively, each holding matching Long Island iced tea drinks. When they stop to talk, the officers learn that one of the women is only 19, not yet old enough to legally drink alcohol. The other is 22. The younger woman, wearing a minimal outfit and speaking with a mixture of bravado and vulnerability, admits she has been working in prostitution for 3 or 4 years, which, given her age, means she entered the life as a mid-teen. She says she's addicted to the money and, in a chilling aside, reveals that she was raped into the trade, forced into sex work by an early experience of sexual violence that was then monetized. After that abuse, she explains the perpetrator was caught, but she stayed in prostitution because the money became a trap of its own. She grew up in foster homes, moving repeatedly without stable support, making her even more vulnerable. She denies having a pimp, framing her work as independent, though the officer pushed back on the idea that someone can be raped into prostitution without some form of control or coercion. In her purse, they find pepper spray, a pen used as a potential weapon, condoms, lip balm, and other items that make up her kit for working the strip. She says she has had to use the pepper spray multiple times in the last 30 days, a stark reminder of the danger she faces with every client. The conversation reveals the contradictions many sex workers live with. She knows the law knows she is underage for alcohol and yet insists she is not doing anything wrong by walking up and down looking at the lights. She tries to insist that even if she weren't working, she might still be out here just having fun. But the presence of condoms, her admission of prior arrests for prostitution in California, and at least one prior solicitation charge in Las Vegas, and the context of her being on the strip at 3 or 4 in the morning tell a different story. The older woman nearby, whom officers suspect of buying the drink for her, tries to distance herself, but the matching cocktails and shared route suggest they are working together. Because they watched the 19-year-old in active possession of alcohol, the officers have a clear legal reason to detain her. They tell the older woman that she is lucky they cannot prove she purchased the drink for a minor. Otherwise, she would also be arrested. The officer spends time trying to break through the younger woman's hardened shell, telling her that life is too short to risk going to jail every time she steps onto the boulevard. He emphasizes that from now on, if they see her again in this context, underage drinking clearly working, they will lock her up without hesitation. She in turn vacillates between defiance and tearful frustration, insisting she only has one life to live and intends to enjoy it, yet also acknowledging that she knows many underage people who drink and work and that it never ends well. Ultimately, officers arrest her for possession of alcohol by a minor, a relatively small charge compared to the larger realities of exploitation and risk swirling around her life. They hope that even this minor arrest might be a pivot point, a moment that nudges her toward leaving the game. She says she will quit in about 5 years, but not now. As the episode closes, the familiar radio code sequence plays again in the background as a reminder that calls never stop, an officer announcing he has someone at gunpoint, dispatch acknowledging and sending backup timestamps ticking by. The viewer has followed officers from an emotionally raw domestic standoff in Ohio to a surreal zebra chase in a suburban neighborhood to revenge-fueled street conflict in Portland to the shadowed corners of a parking lot where sex and drugs intersect, and finally to hotel rooms and the neon-washed sidewalks of Las Vegas, where prostitution has moved from streets to screens and back again. Each segment illustrates a different facet of law enforcement's daily reality: the need to read people quickly, to separate truth from self-serving lies, to improvise solutions when the suspect is an animal that can swim better than you, and to lance enforcement with empathy when a suspect is also a victim of past abuse. Together, they form a continuous portrait of a job in which every shift can bring both absurdity and danger, tragedy and dark humor, and in which officers must be prepared for anything from a knife in a domestic argument to a zebra in a swimming pool every time they put on the uniform.